In this tutorial, I'd like to take some time to walk through the first of our assigned documents and our assigned objects, which we will create within SketchUp. This is under the introductory CAD items PDF that I've shared through Schoology. And one interesting note, or one note you should make prior to starting this, is that the units designated by these tick marks on all objects within this document are either a whole unit or a half unit. And you can typically decipher which is a whole or a half, not only by the size of the space in between the two, but also when you reference the halves across the rest of that object, and you'll eventually run into a fact that the units just don't match up. In the case of the height of this object, we have 3 units high, or 3 inches tall, and along the back edge here we'll also notice 3 units, but these back units are half units. So 1.5 is cut away from this 3 unit tall or 3 inch tall object. Just a side note for the introductory CAD items. Now, coming back and getting started within SketchUp, the quickest way, or the reason why you always have this man or woman or person standing in your SketchUp window, and this person changes with every new version of SketchUp, so you can kind of tell which version you're using if you see if it's an older man or a younger person, or a man or a woman. Every time the version changes, they change the person. But the primary reason for having this person is to understand how far zoomed in or zoomed out you are. So if that person appears very, very tiny near the origin of this document, again, we need to zoom in. Or vice versa. If we're zoomed way too far in and we can barely see his foot, it looks enormous, maybe we need to back out a little bit. But again, it's just for help in getting set up with the original view of this document. Now what I'm going to do is, because I'm zoomed in here pretty close to his foot, and I know we're going to be dealing with documents, objects that are about 7 or 8 inches long, I can zoom in so that way, again, I can obviously see a 7 or 8 inch line being drawn down here near the origin. So I'm going to select with the arrow tool and hit delete, and I'm going to get started with my line tool, or this pencil tool, in the creation of my object. Now the first object is 7 inches long along the red axis, or our x-axis. So I can, the quickest way to go about creating a straight line of a specific length is to single click at the origin, and working in the positive direction, which is the red, solid red line side of this axis, the x-axis, I'm floating on top of the red axis, and I'm going to type in 7, and in the lower right hand corner for length you can notice that 7 is entered, and by default inches is our default unit. So I'm going to hit enter, and I'll see that this line was dropped directly on top of the axis with a green endpoint, and I am currently snapped to continue my drawing in the next direction, or the next line is to be created. I also know it's 4 inches in the Y, and then that this closes off completely coming back. So I just close this surface off by snapping back to the Y-axis. If it's not snapping, let me know, and I can ensure that your mouse clicks are snapping back to your axis. It should do this by default. Now that I've closed this plane, and anytime you snap a solid surface shut, you're going to get this coloring in effect, making it solid. And if it does not close, it's because one of your corners is not completely closed. If you wish to get back to your arrow tool for any point, or exit your line tool, for instance, when you create a line, you automatically are snapped and the tool is still on. If you wish to exit the tool or get back to your arrow tool, it's a quick shortcut is to hit your space bar, and you'll now be loaded back with your arrow tool, and you'll also be removed from that line tool, which is again automatically snapped from your previous point. So I'm going to undo that, we don't need it, but again, it's just a quick way in which to get out of it using a tool. So 7, and again, if I check the original document here, I can count some units by moving across this document. Be sure to be counting the space between these tick marks, otherwise you're going to count 1 extra for every time you count along a surface's edge, because there's always 1 beginning and 1 ending mark, and distance is measured between marks. So if we're counting these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that's a very different result than having 8 if we counted each of the tick marks. Again, just a quick heads up and a common mistake that I see students make. Height of this object is an overall height of 3 units or 3 inches. So I'm going to grab my push-pull tool. Push-pull tool, both words starting with the letter P, can also be loaded by just hitting the letter P on your keyboard. Another keyboard shortcut that will definitely speed up the rate at which you complete some of these assignments. I'm going to single click and move my cursor in the positive direction, not the negative direction, which is along the dotted blue axis. I'm going to come in the positive direction and then type in the distance. In this case, it's 3, and enter. So I'm now 7 inches by 4 inches by 3 inches tall. Hit the space bar, get back to my arrow tool so I can click out of my window. And now I can begin laying out where I'm going to cut away or subtract material from this object. So there's 2 ways in SketchUp to work, and so far we've been working additively. We've been adding information to the drawing. But now we need to work subtractively, and we're going to actually cut this middle section out. If I take a look at this, I have 1, 2, 3 units. These are half units, so it's 1.5 units wide, and a cutout that drops down into our material by 1, 2, 3 units, or 1.5 inches, because again it's a half unit, to remove this central portion of material. On the near edge, it's a 1 inch wide piece of material that still sticks up back to the original height of this object. So we need to come in here and lay these points out. Now there are a few other tools you can utilize to do this, but for the first assignment I would like all of this to be done with just the pencil tool. And in this case, I want to click and mark in 1.5 inches from the back corner of this object, just like we saw on the PDF. In order to do this, to ensure that we're accurately creating lines of the proper length, please note the color of the little dot where your tool is resting. In this case, I'm resting on a green dot, which is the end point or the corner of this object. If I come in a little bit from the edge and my dot is now red, I'm somewhere else along the edge of that object, and I'm no longer certain the length of the line I'm about to draw. Also, if you come across a blue dot, that is the midpoint of an edge. So this back edge, if I want to find the middle of it, I can just float until I find a blue dot. It will also state that that is the midpoint. But in this case, I want to start from the corner, and I want to come in 1.5 or 1.5 inches. So I'm just going to type 1.5, enter. Now, my line disappeared because I'm drawing a line on top of an edge. And so I need to move my cursor across that edge, and I just found the midpoint, which is 3/4 of an inch in, halfway to where I want to be, and then continue into 1.5 inches, and now I'm going to bring my line straight across that object. So I now have that space that I do not want to cut away. On the other side, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to come in 1 inch and click enter, and then drag again that line across the top surface. Now that I've done this, I can remove that middle portion, again using the P for push-pull tool to load my cursor, or selecting it from the tool palette and pushing down, in this case the negative direction, 1.5. All moves will be considered will require a positive value to be entered. The negative or positive direction is determined by where you drag your cursor prior to entering that data. So 1.5, enter, will move a negative push-pull value because I started my push-pull in the negative direction. So again, I just cut that material away from the middle of my object.